From ABC News headquarters in New York, John Stossel and Elizabeth Vargas.
Good evening and welcome to 2020. With Michael Jackson now officially charged with child molestation, more people are wondering, what did he do with those young boys he invited home, often for sleepovers? Tonight, for the first time, you'll hear from one of them. He's a former child movie star who once was one of Jackson's staunch defenders, but that has changed, and now he's ready to testify against Jackson.
Corey Feldman has just been added to the list of witnesses for the prosecution. He's under court order not to talk about the case, but just before he was silenced, he told his story exclusively to 2020's Martin Bashir. What did go on between him and Michael Jackson? And another intriguing question, why is he speaking out now against a man who was once his close and trusted friend?
Okay. All right, let's go.
Corey Feldman.
All right, get a little closer.
Michael,
okay. All right, go ahead.
Michael Jordan. Jackson. We just wanted to take this moment to say hello.
Hello.
And we're in Palm Springs, making of in the closet short film.
This is the story of the relationship between Corey Feldman and Michael Jackson. The tale of a lost boy who found his hero. Their friendship. His worship of a superstar.
So did you idolize him?
I did idolize him. I put him on this pedestal.
And, says Feldman, his growing realization that maybe their friendship wasn't all it seemed at the time. Late last week, 33-year-old Corey Feldman went to the prosecutor in the Michael Jackson case to tell his story. Now you're about to hear why. Corey Feldman was one of Michael Jackson's favoured inner circle, an angelic child star who'd appeared in hundreds of movies and commercials, and as allegation followed allegation, Corey Feldman has always stood by his childhood hero.
Don't treat me like a criminal, because I am innocent.
In 1993, he defended Jackson in an interview with police.
He never did anything out of line. I mean, anything, you know? I mean, the closest he ever came to touching me was like maybe slapping me on the leg once.
And in 2003, he defended him again.
I've had kids come over to my house plenty of times as an adult. I've had kids plenty of times come over and say, you know, this kid's sick, he's got cancer, he wants to, you know, spend a day with you. Let's take him to Disneyland.
But tonight, for the first time, Corey Feldman reveals why he says he can no longer stand by Michael Jackson.
You don't understand the toll that it takes having to be friends with somebody like Michael Jackson. Because you spend your whole life defending this friend. No, he's not gay. No, he's not a weirdo.
Now, when was this?
This was backstage at the Bad Tour.
Although Feldman was defending Jackson in public, he says his private thoughts in recent years have started to trouble him. And now, as Michael Jackson's trial begins, Corey Feldman says he's decided he can remain silent no longer.
I started looking at each piece of information. And with that came this sickening realization that there have been many occurrences in my life and in my relationship to Michael that have created a question of doubt.
It was a relationship that began at the height of Michael Jackson's fame. Riding the success of Thriller, he was idolized by millions, Corey Feldman among them.
Blink your eyes.
Feldman had starred in Gremlins and later Stand By Me.
You call my dad a loony again, and I'll kill you.
Loony, loony, loony.
And The Lost Boys.
Good night, bloodsucker.
By 13, he was already a teen idol himself. Feldman finally got his chance to meet Jackson on the set of the 80s smash hit movie, The Goonies.
This was my dream, my wish.
I said, how long are you staying? He said, I don't know, maybe an hour or so. Can't stay long. And I said, well, listen, I really want to talk to you. And do you think that if I gave you my phone number, you would call me? And he goes, sure, I'll call you.
Michael Jackson called him late that night. Feldman says they spoke for 2 hours, and a friendship between a man and a boy began.
Did it seem strange to you that an international musical superstar would be telephoning a boy at that time of the night and having a very detailed 2-hour conversation?
It seems strange to me in the sense that, how did I get so lucky?
Lucky indeed for a boy who, despite his success, was deeply unhappy at home. He'd worked on commercials since the age of 3, but he says his family life was abusive and dysfunctional.
I had a very cruel childhood. It was very cruel. And it seemed wherever I was always hell.
Feldman says that attention from a superstar like Jackson was hugely important to a teenager in despair.
When you come from a broken home, when you need somebody to look up to, a big brother, something of that nature, which I very badly needed, Michael became all of that for me. He would listen to my problems. He would ask me about my problems. He would talk to me about my problems.
Feldman became obsessed with Michael Jackson, dressing like him, even dancing like him. As their relationship developed, Feldman would visit the Jackson family home in Encino, California. Then, one night, he says he got to sleep over.
He had this big, huge painting on the wall, and that painting would come down, and it would be a bed, and that was his bed. That's where he slept. But he let me have that bed, and he went upstairs to a private kind of study area, which he locks the door and disappears behind.
But as Feldman got older, he was cast out from Jackson's inner circle. Feldman had developed a serious drug habit. In 1990, he was arrested and charged with heroin and cocaine possession. It took months of intense rehab to get clean. Feldman says he and Jackson remained in touch until 2001, when they fell out for good. They met backstage before Michael Jackson's 30-year anniversary concert in New York.
And what happened over the next 20 minutes changed my perspective forever. Michael had some paranoid delusion that I had some ill-fated intentions to write some sort of book about him.
So he accused you of that?
Right. Which was categorically untrue. And what happened next was basically the way I perceived it, is that he threatened my life.
The next day, Jackson shunned him. Feldman later released a song expressing his anger for being dumped by his famous friend. He never saw Jackson again, and yet, despite this, he continued to defend him. But then he saw my interview with Jackson and his young companion at the Singer's Neverland Ranch. He says the effect was immediate.
Why can't you share your bed? But the most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone.
When I watched that, it just gave me knots in my stomach. It just felt very, very wrong.
Feldman had visited Neverland when he was younger. Now, as an adult, he says he thought again about this once magical place of innocence.
What do you think the purpose of Neverland is?
Well, that's a pretty leading question. I mean, for most men, I think that they would think it would be a great place to visit with their kids for a day, and that would be the end of it. For a childlike, imaginative, Willy Wonka type man, it would be the place that dreams are made of. For a child molester, it would be bait.
When 2020 returns.
Were you ever shown images by Michael Jackson of naked bodies.
Next. "2020 continues with Martin Bashir.
All my life was filled with misery and pain. So much.
After undergoing drug rehab in the early 90s, Corey Feldman says he's been clean for the last decade. A vegetarian and teetotaler, his career is now benefiting from his improved lifestyle. He's making music with his band, The Truth Movement, and is acting on the stage this summer in New York. He says the last thing he wants is the kind of publicity he's going to get for speaking out. But Feldman says that the birth of his son Zen changed his perspective forever. He could no longer remain silent. He says that talking about what happened between him and Michael Jackson has been the toughest experience of his life. So what does he say really happened during the sleepovers with Michael Jackson?
Were you ever shown any images that were inappropriate?
If you consider it inappropriate for a man to look at a book of naked pictures with a child that's 13 or 14 years old, then your answer would be yes.
When he learned the details of the current case and found out that a key piece of evidence is alleged to be a pornographic magazine with 2 sets of fingerprints on it, Michael Jackson's and the young boy he's accused of molesting, Feldman says he knew he had to reveal his own story.
When Michael and I would talk about him sleeping over at my house, he'd say, "Do you have any books at your house?" "Well, what do you mean? What kind of books?" He'd say, "Well, you know, Playboy, Penthouse, that sort of thing. As long as there's books there, then I'll come sleep over." Now you can take that for what it's worth.
That doesn't prove anything.
Right.
That doesn't prove that Michael Jackson's a paedophile.
No.
That doesn't prove that he's molested anybody.
Right.
So why does it disturb you now?
Because when I look at the pieces of evidence, and I see that one of the pieces of evidence is Michael Jackson looking at pornographic material with a child, and the child is 13 or 14 years old, and the fact that I witnessed that exact occurrence in my own life at the same age has to give me reason to pause and say, if this happened with me and the kid's saying it happened with him, then this can't be all made up and it can't all be lies, because at least that one little thing right there I know is completely accurate.
Michael Jackson never did come to Corey's home, but he says he did get to go to Disneyland with his idol. They stopped at Michael's home on the way.
We went to his apartment, and I noticed a book that he had out on his coffee table. The book contained pictures of grown men and women naked, and the book was focused on venereal diseases in the genitalia. And he sat down with me and he explained it to me. Showed me some different pictures and discussed what those meant. I was kind of grossed out by it. I didn't think of it as a big deal. And for all these years, I probably never thought twice about it. But in light of recent evidence, I have to say that if my son was 13 years old and went to a man's apartment that was 35, and I knew that they were sitting down together talking about this, I would probably beat his ass.
Feldman says he was never molested by Jackson.
Michael Jackson never touched me. He never harmed me. And he never harmed any children in front of me.
But Feldman says he's haunted by the similarities between his story and some of the accuser's claims in the current case against Michael Jackson.
So in your case, you were given attention?
I was given attention.
He found out that you didn't have a happy relationship at home?
True.
He took you to Disneyland and said you could buy anything you want?
True.
He showed you pornography? He showed you images of genitalia with sexual diseases? What was he doing? Was he grooming you?
I'd like to think not.
Is it possible that that was what he was doing?
Of course it's possible.
Is it possible that Michael Jackson is in fact a predatory paedophile?
It is possible.
When you think that, what does that make you feel?
Nothing but sadness.
Feldman says that for him, speaking out has finally become a responsibility, a duty.
This child, if he's telling the truth, and the other children like him, if they're telling the truth, they're small voices, they're weak voices. I was a child who was a celebrity, who was well known, and I don't think that a pedophile of that caliber would be stupid enough to take advantage of that final straw. But with a child that doesn't have a voice, with a child that's weak and has no support, where are the boundaries? So I'm here to say, I hope and I pray that these things never happened. And if they never happened, then there's some real sickness with a lot of people. But if they did happen, then there's a lot of sickness with one person. And that person needs to be punished.
Martin, when Michael Jackson was first accused of molesting a child years ago, did the police question Corey Feldman and ask him what you asked him?
They did. In 1993, Michael Jackson and Corey Feldman were known to have been friends, and Corey Feldman was interviewed. And one of the things he told me is at that time, he was just going through a drug rehabilitation program. He'd been addicted to heroin and cocaine, so he was coming out of that. He was also pretty much on his own because some years earlier he'd been legally emancipated from his own parents, he says from an abusive relationship. And he was spending a great deal of time with the Jackson family. And he says that when he went to the police, it was almost as if he was saying what he felt he should say.
So he didn't talk about the sex magazines?
No, he didn't. He gave very straight but very simple answers, and he never once said, nor does he say now, by the way, that he was sexually molested by Michael Jackson.
In the meantime, he's scheduled to take the stand against Michael Jackson in front of Michael Jackson in a few weeks.
He is. This is one of the things that he finds to be probably the most difficult experience of his life. He's going to be going before the courts and giving evidence for the prosecution against a man he once called his best friend.
In the meantime, Martin, you're working on a special for next Thursday night on Michael Jackson's private lifestyle.
That's right. This is a journey inside Michael Jackson's secret world. The bizarre, the surprising, the disturbing claims, and some of the boys he befriended. 2 years ago, I started making a documentary about Michael Jackson. He invited me to Neverland several times. And on one occasion, I met the boy who would become his accuser. Not long after our meeting, he claimed that Michael Jackson had molested him, charges that have put Jackson on trial today. Since that day, I've had to ask myself, could the boy's allegations be true? So I began to look further into Michael Jackson's life and his unusual friendships with children.
So Martin will have Michael Jackson's Secret World next Thursday night, February 17th at 9 o'clock Eastern Time.
Thank you, Martin, and we will be right back.